All right, here we go with our primer for our Chapter 4 discussion, our discussion of labor market. So who knows, I might use this video someday for something other than Chapter 4 of your OpenStax book written by Timothy Taylor. But for now, our first use is for just exactly that. And Chapter 4 is two parts. Okay, it has a labor market part and a financial markets part, and I only want you to read the labor market part. Right, so you can cut off when the financial market stuff starts. It's interesting. You can read it, love it, but we don't have time to cover everything in the course, so we'll stick to just the labor market stuff to include on your second exam. All right, so the first thing to do, and excuse me if I bob and weave here a little bit at first, is to put up a graph. And the reason that I'm going to bob and weave a little bit at first is because I got to get myself kind of not backwards, because everything that I do, because of being recorded, looks backwards. And then, of course, I want to get my head out of the way of the graph. Okay, so I'm going to put it up. And sometimes I'm going to take the graph out of the way a little bit faster than I normally would. But one of the wonderful things about this format of the video is that you can freeze me anytime you want. Let me do something just for grins in case you want to freeze me. Here's something for your desktop in case you want to do that. Okay, so there you go. So you can freeze that, and you can put that on your desktop, and then you can click on my nose or my teeth or whatever for when you want to do certain things. You're groaning instead of laughing, right? Anyway, all right, so here we have a standard-looking graph based on Chapter 3 that you probably just took an exam on. All right, so we have price, even though there's a W on the y-axis. Right now, it's the price of labor, a particular type of labor. There's not some generic labor market. There's a gazillion labor markets, each for different kinds of labor. Unskilled labor, okay, labor that can do X, labor that can do Y, whatever. Okay, and then on the X-axis, and see, I'm kind of backwards, so I'm trying to decide which hand to get out of the way. There we go. On the X-axis, we have the L, which you notice I'm so used to putting Q on there. There's a Q down there for equilibrium. Well, L stands for the quantity of labor, right? So Q sub E would be the amount of labor when the wage settles in via market forces at W sub E. Okay, for example, in the unskilled labor market, say maybe $7, $8, $9 an hour. Okay, so dollars per hour on the y-axis, and then quantity per time period, hours per week in this case, on the x-axis. Okay, you notice a little bit of a hieroglyphics down here, if I can point to it. There we go. It says U are greater than 0. What does that mean? Well, it says Q sub E, and quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied in equilibrium. So that would seem to suggest, right, that everybody that wants to work at W sub E can find a job. That's not exactly right. It's pretty close. Right? Because, it suggests that there's not any unemployment. And we know that even in the best of economic times, there is unemployment. The unemployment rate has never been at 0. So what equilibrium means is that anybody who wants to work at W sub E can find a job pretty fast. Okay? But at any given moment, and then, S0, D0, I didn't put the zeros on the S and D, that at any given moment, there's some people between jobs. And that counts as unemployment, right? Somebody who's not currently employed, but in seeking employment, it's counted as unemployed. So when the unemployment rate's below 4% for the economy as a whole, that typically means that if you want to find a job, you're going to be able to find one really fast. And so there's not really any economic problem of people being without work for any significant length of time. All right, so to get my head out of the way of this graph to show it a little bit more, you see on the S and D, you see it says households next to S, and it says businesses mostly next to D. You see, a labor market is a product market. Remember your circular flow graph. There's product markets, and then there's goods markets. Okay, in the product market, okay, that's what's Chapter 3. The demanders are the households, and the suppliers are mostly businesses. Well, see, now we're going to do it in reverse, because a labor market is a resource market, and suppliers are the households, and the demanders, the purchasers, are businesses mostly. The government is going to hire some people, and also households directly employ people, butlers, maids, handyman, that kind of thing. But businesses mostly. Okay, so that's a key difference between what we've been doing so far. So, for example, it's not okay to call it the job market, even though your book does that a little bit. Okay, it's the labor market. People don't buy and sell jobs. A job results from an agreement to purchase, sell labor. Okay, so it's the labor market, okay, not the job market. So beware of that little bit of terminology. Okay, so and then another significant difference between the markets we've been studying so far and the markets that we're going to look at now in Chapter 4 is, I'll go ahead and put this down, is that resource markets, labor markets, the demand is a derived demand. In other words, when I hire somebody, I don't want to tell them to run around in circles for an hour and say, okay, thank you very much, here's your $10 or whatever amount we agreed upon. What I want is what I think they can produce in a certain amount of time. Okay, so it's a derived demand. My demand for their services is based on my expectation of how much of something that they can produce in a certain amount of time. And then I'm looking marginal benefit versus marginal cost. I'm raising my hands up and down off the screen. I'm looking at marginal benefit to me. They're going to produce this stuff for me. Okay, and then I'm looking at marginal cost to me, how much I expect to have to pay them. And then I decide, based on comparing the two, how much of their time I want to purchase, because marginal analysis always leads to some sort of an optimizing decision. It's like, I want 8 hours of their time, or 7 hours, or even with time and a half for overtime. Yeah, I want 10 hours. Okay, so most of the time I'm thinking, the extra after I've already had them for eight hours, do I want to pay time and a half for another couple of hours when they're likely to be slowed down because they're tired, and now I've got to pay them more? No, but under dire circumstances, maybe after the hurricane and something's broken or leaking and I want it to be fixed or stop leaking really fast, I might be quite willing to incur those additional costs at a lower marginal benefit for the 9th and 10th hour than the higher productivity during the first 8. Okay, so again, just to recap, the supply is households in a labor market, and the demand is businesses mostly. Okay, so when we say the quantity demanded, we mean how many jobs the businesses want to provide, which means how many people that they want to hire. And the law of demand applies. Okay, so for something like the minimum wage, we know that if we set the wage higher than it would have been in a free market, that fewer people will be hired than they otherwise would have been. Okay, so how much less will certainly affect whether someone still supports that despite the loss of jobs, or whether they say, no, that's too high a price to pay for the remaining people that are still hired to get a raise. Okay, so another point to make, I'm looking at my notes over here on the side, another point to make is that workers deciding whether to supply their time are thinking about leisure or unpaid home work in the home is the opportunity cost, what they're going to give up in order to be employed. Okay, so, and by the way, it's true that that leisure time or work in particular, can be an inferior good at some point, which means that maybe you're working 50 hours a week and your boss offers you a raise and it's going to increase your income, right? And you're thinking, okay, at that rate, I only want to work 40 hours a week, right? So because you're making more per hour, you decide to take some of that additional income in more time to spend with your family and doing things other than being employed rather than less. Mostly, a higher wage rate will yield additional labor offered, right? The supply line slopes upward. Is that an upward on the picture there? Anyway, the supply line looks like it did in this graph, right? An upward slope. And a lot of that is that if the wage rate goes up in a particular labor market, right, for a particular type of labor, it means that we're going to attract marginal workers from other labor markets. Okay, and so that'll increase the supply available at a given wage rate. But some of that is an increase in labor market participation as well. Some of that, by that I mean the response to the higher wage. Also, there's just some market entry at the higher wage. People saying, at that old wage, now I'm going to stay home, take care of the kids, build projects, stay retired, whatever. Oh, the wage is a little higher now than it used to be. I must be a marginal worker because at the old wage, I wasn't interested in being employed for money, but now I'm thinking about it. I'm considering it. By the way, again, that's a big part of the minimum wage story, which we'll get into without bouncing back and forth out of it in a few minutes, maybe more than just a few minutes. But as part of this chapter 4 video. Maybe part 2. I might take a break between this initial part and later part. But another part of the minimum wage story is that if the wage is mandated to be higher than in the free market, some additional labor will be supplied that wouldn't have been, right? I mean, the supply line slopes upward than otherwise would have been the case, which means there's labor market entry. Okay, people that weren't working are saying, you know, at $8 an hour, nah, I should stay focused on my studies or whatever, and $10 an hour. Okay, maybe I'll take 4 classes rather than 5, or push my luck and not sleep as much or study as much, and go work 10 hours a week rather than 0 hours a week. People making comparisons and trade-offs. Okay, and so that means you're climbing up the supply line. People with higher opportunity costs enter the market when the wage rate increases, and vice versa. Okay, again, looking over here at my notes, planning to move forward. One of the things that the book gets into that we want to just throw out there, fishing for questions and see if we can generate some activity online or in our next class. One of the things that the book talks about is technology as a shifter, right? So here's a graph, again, that you can, I might go back and forth between it, but whether I hold it up for a few seconds or hold it up for quite a while, again, technology says, freeze that frame so I can stare at that graph a little while and see what it says. Maybe I missed something. That's something you can't do in class unless you raise your hand and say, Dr. Merrifield, or excuse me, it's too formal. Doc, could you please put that graph back up? Okay, well, so you can take care of that just by your button on the controls and freeze that here. So, okay, so you can see, again, I'm kind of backwards. It's like looking in a mirror on this video. There's unskilled labor, other hand, unskilled labor over here, and skilled labor over there. And a change in the level of technology, undoubtedly an improvement, is the shifter. So what do we got going on there? We're saying that typically when there's an improvement in technology, not only do we need people to produce, sometimes if the technology isn't just a method to do things, but it's an actual machinery, hardware, you know, we need people capable of producing it. Okay? And sometimes the technology is able to save labor. So what it does in the unskilled labor market is it decreases demand. Oops, there I go. See, it's that mirror thing again over here. Okay, see, you see that the D1 is a little hard to discern versus the D0, but it's a shift to the right. And we see at the original W0 wage rate, right up there, we see the little point right there. At that wage rate is to the left of the original point. So that means at the original W0 wage rate, there's a what? A surplus of unskilled labor. And that's what forces the wage down to right there at W1. Okay, so in the unskilled labor market, there's typically a decrease in demand as a result of technology improvement. Workers aren't probably being unskilled workers going to help produce the technology. And then the use of the technology typically decreases the demand for that labor. Okay, and then on the other graph, and I'm looking back here so I don't get to smear this graph. See, the skilled labor market, it's the opposite. Okay, not only do we probably need the skilled labor to produce the technology, but its use, it may also require more skilled labor, right? The application of the technology to do things that probably less skilled workers were able to do. And the net effect, well, you can't tell it from my sloppy graph, the net effect of the increased demand for skilled labor and the decreased demand for unskilled labor is probably a net decrease in the amount of labor applied to do certain things. What does that mean? Well, that means some labor's been freed up. Whoops. You don't like your labor to be freed up, do you? Because that means you've been laid off. Okay? Or typically that doesn't happen that much as a result of technology. It just shrinks how many people they replace after some quit and leave and do other things. But see, that's actually a good thing, freeing up labor, because it means those workers can go add to other labor markets and increase production there, and we can do more with our limited resources, right? But it's it's sometimes a brutal process of, hey, you're out of a job, go find another one. Okay, and then also the freeing up of some of that labor. Whoops, lost my train of thought there. The freeing up of that additional labor not only allows us to produce more of other things, but we need some of that to produce the technology. Okay, so the market works in brilliant, efficient ways, but sometimes in brutal, indifferent ways. And it just kind of runs over people. So that's why people have said that. Remember that question 24 in the last homework about no economists knowing the value of nothing and the price of everything. Yeah. That just says that economists are too focused on efficiency and not sensitive enough to what happens sometimes in that pursuit of efficiency. The bargain hunting by consumers is a pretty brutal process, right? Because it means they want the lowest price for the highest quality. Kind of normal, right? But in the process, the old ways of doing things that are no longer competitive, and the people that produce those are out of a job. You've got to find another one. Sometimes those other jobs are in different places than their old jobs, and so they're uprooted and forced to move. Okay, so pretty brutal, but efficiency, right? Pursuit of efficiency. And sometimes the jobs go all the way to other countries, okay, as we suddenly import things that we didn't used to. And what happens when we do that? Well, we free up labor. Whoops, there we go again. And that labor goes to where our comparative advantage is. So eventually, that process improves our standard of living. But initially, it hurts somebody and makes them move or retire early. And sometimes that produces elections like the last one we had, where both candidates preached reduction of trade, protectionism, so as to stop some of these short-term negative effects. The long-term effects are so dispersed that they're not as readily seen as the short-term effects on labor markets. Okay, you see I held that up there a long time, not really intending to. But, okay, so I've fished for questions, right? It's in your book, just like all the stuff we talk about. It's there in your book. Maybe I don't say it exactly the same way. And that's probably deliberate, because why would I say it the same way? If you understand the one in the book, there'll be no reason for me to say it the same way. If you don't understand it the way it's said in the book, maybe if I say it differently, you will. And if you don't understand either of the ways that it's said, well, then we have the online forums and our classes. I should be able to get through quite a bit of Chapter 4 in these videos that I'm recording today. So our next class, where we have time to discuss these, you should come loaded for bear, literally, because we want to devote most of that time to discussion. If I'm facing a bunch of blank stares in there, I might jump to the next chapter real fast, our chapter on elasticities. And by I say too fast, it may mean you've left a lot needing clarified. And then by moving on, sometimes it has less of a chance of getting clarified online or in later questions when we're suddenly immersed in new things. And the elasticities chapter, the one that comes after the labor market chapter, is for most students the most difficult chapter of the semester. And so that all the more reason is the reason, get this behind you. Everything clarified that you need, because you're going to probably be immersed in something that's a little more challenging. And then you may forget about this until exam 2, where you go, whoops, didn't ask about that, forgot about it while I was enmeshed in elasticities and other stuff. Got to get after it right away. All right, so much for that pep talk. Moving right along. All right, I was talking a little bit earlier about leisure and work and being a trade-off. Okay, so here's a graph that's in your book. So here's a little bit of work with it to clarify it. Again, you can rewind and go back to this frame on the video anytime you want, with me poking my head around the side of this thing. And let's see, make it flatter looking. Okay, so where does that 840 come from on the income? See, that's what we need to do with these. Where do these numbers come from? And why do lines shift? Oh, well, let's see. What do we got on the x-axis? Because that's, see, the straight line is a budget constraint. Remember our discussion of that? Okay, so what we're doing assumption-wise is saying, okay, Joan, okay, so this graph is about one person, has decided that no way, no how is she going to work more than 70 hours a week. If she works less, okay, then, we get some extra leisure time. Okay, so actually it's indirect extra leisure time. Probably need to clarify that a little better here on my x-axis. Because see, if Joan works 70 hours a week, well, then that's the minimum extra leisure time over whatever 24 times 7 minus 70 is, right? Because that's how many hours there are left in the week after you subtract 70 hours. Okay, if you only work 40 hours a week, well then, right, 30 extra hours of leisure time over that minimum of whatever 24 times 7 minus 70 is. All right, so where does that 840 come from on the income side? Well, if we work 70 hours, the full 70 hours, at $12 an hour, right? So we see down at the bottom here, or we've specified that the wage rate is $12 an hour. Okay? If we multiply 12 times 70, the 840 tells us the amount of income we generate if we have no additional leisure time above and beyond the 24 times 7 minus 70 weekly hours of leisure time. Most of that we would be spending sleeping. Okay, so one choice on our budget constraint is to work 70 hours a week, okay, and thus have $840 per week to spend. Okay, so that budget line, the slope of it is dependent on the wage rate, the rate at which we can trade an hour of leisure time for dollars. And see, one of the things that this assumes is that you have a choice via your job of exactly how many hours a week you want to work. Think of, so we're doing that to keep things simple. Think about what your budget constraint really looks like. It's probably more like a point that starts, well, at least for you full-time workers out there, at 40. And then in some cases, you're allowed to work a little less than 40 or a little bit more than 40, depending on how things are going at work, and in some cases, whether you want to or not. Okay, think about how to model that. That's how you practice using these things. But if your discretion is to work 0 hours or 70 hours at $12 an hour, that big black line is your budget constraint. And 1,050 times 70, as we see the fainter line up here, is your budget constraint if you get a raise. A raise to what? Well, let's see. I didn't multiply it out there, but I think that's $15 an hour. Okay, so if you get a raise to $15 an hour, budget constraint shifts out from the dark line to the lighter one up here. Right? Play what if to study these things. All right? Moving on to the next graph. There it is again, in case you want to go back to this frame and look at it again. And by the way, as always, as been doing so far, all of these slides, including for videos and the ones in class, always get posted so that if you don't want to rewind back to it, and so I can use it again in class, they'll be posted in Blackboard Learn. All right, some red meat for a labor market. I see that I'm foaming a little bit from, I forgot to bring myself a bottle of water to drink. My mouth is getting dry. Now we'll get through it here for a few more minutes before I pause it and start another video. Some red meat. You're saying, red meat? Doc, you're holding up a graph that says men on one graph and women on the other side. So how's this red meat? Well, I'm going to tell you, and it's true, it's positive economics, that equal pay for equal work is inefficient sometimes. Gasp, you say. See, I'm going to illustrate to you that there are trade-offs between principles that are just inviolate, and economic efficiency. There are times, yes, there are times when men and women doing equal work is not worth an equal amount to their employers, including the employers that happen to be of the gender that has the lower equilibrium wage. Okay, so here's an example, just to kind of reverse it from the way that it's perceived to normally be, where the supply and demand intersect at a higher wage for women than it does for men. Okay, if we mandate equal pay for equal work, we're either going to have a surplus of what? Of men offsetting a shortage of women. Okay, if we mandate the equal pay for equal work at some in-between rate, right? Something between the two WEs up there. Or we could say, no, we're going to mandate that men get paid as much as women, right? So maybe this is our starting point, and the women right now are getting paid more than men. Okay. Think of an example where that might be the case. How about as a restaurant server, especially some that specialize in attracting men? I won't name any of them. But clearly there would be a case where the employer, even if the employer happened to be a female owner of the restaurant, a male owner of the restaurant would prefer to hire females, right? Because maybe the customers prefer looking at female servers, young and beautiful, as opposed to young male servers, handsome. And I've never figured out why men seem to be more important in choosing a restaurant to go to than women, since there are the equal numbers of each. But I don't know of as many restaurants, and I can't think of any at the moment. Maybe that's an accident because I'm a male. But I can't think of any counterparts to Hooters, for example, that specialize in young, handsome, burly men catering to a largely female crowd. I'm sure that's out there somewhere. Okay, but I mean, here's a case where it would be the opposite. right? So what if we mandated that all employees get whatever the women happen to be getting right now? It's just a matter of equal pay for equal work. Well, we would have a, what? Market would clear for women, and we'd have a surplus of men. And since the quantity actually purchased is always the lesser of the two, okay, and I've got another graph where I sketch this out. I just want to go with just the generic version for the moment. But since quantity actually purchased, when we discussed this in our lead up to the first exam, is always the smaller of the two when quantity demanded and quantity supplied are not equal, it means that fewer men will be working if we mandate the higher WCB for women for both men and women. Okay, now the ones that are working will get a higher wage than they did before. Okay, but we'll have a deadweight loss because there'll be a surplus of men and quantity actually purchased will be smaller than it had been previously when WE sub for men was set by the market, and we'll have a deadweight loss. So it's positive economics for me to assert that that's efficiency reducing. Okay, it's not likely politically we would have the W sub E for men imposed on the women, but if it did happen, then we'd have a shortage of women hired. Okay, so but in any event, it's inefficient to do that. Now, is it okay or preferred to have an inefficiency to not violate that core principle, which makes so darn much sense, equal pay for equal work? Intelligent people can disagree. I mean, inefficiency means you're paying a price for a principle. And that's important to know what the price is of things that diminish efficiency, right? So we can make an intelligent social choice, policy choice of whether or not it's worth it or not. And when I say we, I mean through the political process. And naturally, there's hardly ever unanimous agreement, so it'll be an election and somebody will win. All right. So I'm going to move to an example that I heard of in the 80s when I was a young professor at the University of Hawaii, Hilo. And it was women discriminating against women, sort of. And they had a good reason. Okay, let me move on to the slide for that. Okay, I just happened to be listening to the radio when I was there, and these two nurses for the local hospital, not nurses, hospital administrators, who happened to be women, were recruiting nurses. There's a shortage of nurses in a lot of places, and I mean a literal shortage. And the reason for that is, and we'll get into that later in the semester, is because many markets for nurses are not competitive markets. Okay, and so the wage is set based on a market power arrangement called monopsony, right? And because of monopsony, there is a real shortage. In other words, the number of nurses employed is fewer than the number of nurses available at the price being paid to nurses, the wage being paid to nurses. Okay. So back to this example in Hawaii, which assumes competitive markets, just for the sake of the example, because I think that's what was going on there. It wasn't a monopsony thing that made them prefer men to women. And again, these women that were on this radio program weren't saying that men work harder at nurses or that they're smarter nurses or more productive nurses. As far as I could tell, they had no reason to care whatsoever about differences in their productivity. Okay, so you're saying, well, what's the problem? Why the different wage rate? Why is using some made up numbers here, why is it $20 an hour for men and $16 an hour for women? Why are they willing to pay more for men, and why does it take a higher wage for the equilibrium to be established for men versus women? Well, what these two administrators said, two women, was that the turnover rate tends to be lower for men. It's costly to train a nurse. Okay, so they were willing to pay more for identical production on the job, if that person happened to be a male, than if the applicant happened to be female, simply because, not knowing anything else about the two applicants, it was their gender tended to explain that one would be on the job longer on average than the other. Okay, so you're thinking, is that fair or unfair? I don't know. Back to efficiency again. Efficiency says, okay, let the market work. Let the money be whatever it is, 20 versus the 16, to create a market equilibrium, demanding equal pay for equal work. making that as a constraint through the law would reduce efficiency. Normative economics would be to say we ought not to do that in the name of efficiency. Some people would agree with that. Some people would not. Some would say, okay, I get it, that setting an equal wage for the two, despite the fact that the one has the valued lower turnover than the other, that would be inefficient. But we still want to do that because the principle of equal pay for equal work is too important to allow any exceptions, even for some improvement in market efficiency. Okay, and so if we look at this example, we also have to think about whether demanding the $20 an hour for women really benefits the women as a group. Now, clearly it benefits some women. If you look at my graph over there and you see some numbers, if we set the wage at $20 an hour and say it's got to be paid the same to men as for women, the quantity supplied of women would be 300, and the quantity demanded for women at $20 an hour would be 200. Okay, if we just leave the market alone, the wage will go down to 16 for women, and then 240 will be apply for a nurse's job, and 240 will be hired with some churn, meaning that at any given moment might only be 238 actually working, and the hospital or doctor's office is looking to hire a couple nurses, and at $16 an hour, they find somebody pretty fast. Okay, so we set the $20 an hour. 200 of the 300 nurses, okay, are, 200 of the 240 nurses that would have been working at $16 an hour still are going to be working, and they're going to be making $20 an hour rather than 16. But 40 of the nurses that would have been working at $16 an hour won't be able to find a job at $20 an hour, right? So we have 40 nurses that are arguably worse off by a lot, right? They're going to have to find some other way to make a living, okay? And therein lies the trade-off. So we have a deadweight loss in this little triangle right here. Whoops, I'll get my finger to point at it the right way. There it is. Okay, we have a deadweight loss equal, there's not enough numbers on there to do that. We'll definitely do one of those in class, bigger graph than I can get on the screen here while I'm talking to you. But those 40 additional nurses are willing to work, okay, for something that's above their opportunity cost, right? And so they would benefit from being nurses rather than something else. Society would benefit, okay? So that they're not going to be working as nurses at $20 an hour means it's inefficient. It means there's a dead weight loss, which by now you calculated for some stuff in Chapter 3. So this will be just another application of a concept that you may get, you may start rolling your eyes later in the semester when we keep talking about dead weight loss. It means the failure to achieve the maximum available gains from trade, or the maximum social surplus. Okay, so did I make some of you mad? I didn't mean to, right? But intelligent people disagree on the importance of equal pay for equal work, right? Most of the time it makes perfect sense, and it's efficient to do it, but here's an example. Women discriminating against women, so to speak, for what they regarded as entirely economically rational reasons. And other people could say, yeah, I agree, that that's economically rational, but no, it's still not okay to pay women less than the same thing, than men doing exactly the same thing, just because women as a group tend to have higher turnover rates. All right, so think about this quite a bit before we talk about it, because there's a whole bunch of things in there that you may desire some clarification on. Okay. I'd like to put this next slide up. Your book talks about wedge results, okay? The wedge effect of, say, labor market regulation. What does that mean, just in sort of a common sense way of thinking things, a wedge effect? Well, it means that the cost of labor to employers can differ from the payment made to employees, and regulation can definitely do that. So can a bunch of mandates like putting money into workman's comp, putting money into Social Security, putting money into Medicare. All these things make employees cost a lot more to the employer than the paycheck reflects to employees. And now you know that your gross and net differs already by a significant amount, but the difference for your employer is even bigger than that, right? Because there are regulations of things you can't be asked to do or not do, or things that have to be done in the workplace in the name of safety. Some of them the employers would do anyway, but it's the law just in case. Some they would not do because they've done this and said, I can warn them and, whatever. And there's just no way to drive this risk, unsafe risk, all the way down to zero. And driving it all the way down to zero just doesn't make sense because it costs a gazillion dollars to totally eliminate the risk. And I can get the risk down pretty low without that. And so the government focused on avoiding scandal may overregulate something and as a result impose a cost of employers. So what we end up is something called a tax equivalent. Okay, so here we have a case where D0, S0, that's our first step in that first step process where we just set up, okay, suppose here's where we are before something happens that we want to think about the effect of. Okay, and then we impose some regulation, say in the name of safety, and as a result, that drives up the cost of hiring employees. And so there's this shift in the demand to the left to that lighter, right, pen versus marker. Okay, and as a result of that, the equilibrium wage falls down to W1, even though we can tell from the original demand line that with fewer workers hired, what's called the marginal revenue product. Right, see where it says MRP over here on the right above where my index finger is. Okay, marginal revenue product, that's the value of the worker's output, the additional output times the value of that output. We'll become more familiar with that term, marginal revenue product, a little later in the semester. Okay, so the wage rate goes down and the value of the labor goes up because it's scarcer as far as the employer is concerned. So that's what we mean by the wedge result. Right, MRP is what the labor is worth at the margin when L sub 1 is the amount of labor employed. And when L sub 1 is employed, the amount actually paid to those workers only has to be W sub 1. Okay, so the wedge is the difference between MRP, the value of the work, and the actual payment to the work. Okay, and so the tax equivalent is, hey, we could achieve exactly that same result by just imposing a tax. Maybe that's what we should do, because if we did that, at least we would generate some revenue that we could use to mitigate this or to lower other taxes or to pay for additional government services. Okay, so the wedge result is just sort of like an implicit tax, except it doesn't generate any money. Okay, and then the deception issue there is maybe we're doing this because we don't want the workers to realize what the cost is of the government avoiding some scandal every 20 or 30 years, right? Maybe we don't want them to know that. I mean, they get their paycheck and they have no idea that their labor is really worth quite a bit more than that, and that it's some regulation that's causing them to be paid $10 an hour when the cost of their labor to the employee is really $14. And you're saying, well, can I have the whole 14? No, the other 4 is the cost of all these rules and regulations and deductions from your paycheck. And you go, wow, I'd rather have that additional money than all those protections and whatever. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, but so the deception involved is you don't get all that information. That you need to be pretty economically literate to understand some of those things. Sorry, I'm wagging my finger off the screen, which can't figure out where to point. Might be a reason for you to become more economically literate, right? So you can make better choices as a voter and say, this sounds good of getting all these things, Medicare, Social Security. Wow, I didn't know it was costing me so much to get them. And no. Well, maybe I'd rather have a little more in my paycheck and forego some of those benefits in the future, now that I understand them better. All right, here's another example of the same thing. Okay, only here we have some numbers, right? And there we have the deadweight loss in there, that shaded area with A and C on the one side, right? The A is the $12 an hour that you're worth, $10 an hour that you're getting paid. So some imposition on the employer reduces their demand. Remember, the demanders are the employers, and the cost to you is $2 an hour if you're one of the 100 that still is working and not one of the 40 that wouldn't be working anymore as a result of the reduced demand. And you're thinking, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that it's costing me $2 an hour to have all these nice things like workman's comp and unemployment insurance and FICA, right? That's that Social Security and Medicaid, Medicare deduction. Not to mention the income tax, right? For some of us, I'll tell you, in my case, I think if I took my retirement deduction out of there, I think I get about 70% in my paycheck of the gross. Okay, it's probably higher for you because you're in a lesser tax bracket than I am, but it's still quite a difference, right? Quite a wedge effect. Let me hold it up a little higher in case it was off the screen, and even hide behind it a little bit. There it is. You'll see it again in class. It'll be posted in BB Learn, but in case you want to freeze it there and stare at it a little bit and write down your questions and then post them online before you forget them and before I start talking about other things. All right. I think that's long enough for the first go around. I'm going to do the minimum wage here in a second, although for you it could be hours till you decide to watch the next go around.